I picked up a brand new aftermarket fuel tank for the CRX. Nothing was wrong with the original fuel tank, I just knew it was going to be so rusty that in my opinion was no longer usable. So I just knew that when it comes time to install a new fuel pump, I was going to be also installing a brand new fuel tank. Now here I am just scuffing the underside of the fuel tank with a steel wool and cleaning it off so I could get it ready for some chip guard. And the reason for that is because the tank sits underneath the car obviously, so it's exposed and it is going to be prone to being hit by debris and rocks and things like that. And the way these gas tanks come is they have a very thin layer of paint on them, and you can imagine if a rock hits it, it's very easy for that paint to just chip off and it's all downhill from there. The rust just pretty much starts to kick in and it just starts to rot the tank away. So I feel like giving it a good solid coat of chip guard and then a coat of paint over that is just gonna further help to protect it. So why not, right? It's a step that I can easily do right now, so I might as well go ahead and get it done. This stuff works great. You just have to do it in stages. As you can see, I gave it the first coat and then the instructions say to wait 5 minutes, so it's what I did. This is the second coat right now, and after I'm done with it, of course I'm gonna wait another 5 minutes per the instructions. And the final coat, I'm just gonna full send it, right? Give it the beans and pretty much empty the can on this final coat. And after that, I actually let it sit for about an hour or two, and it was hard to the touch after that. You could not believe how quickly this thing cures, and it felt nice and solid by the time it was completely cured. Now it's a little difficult to see, but that chip guard is actually a white color and I wasn't okay with that. I wanted it silver to kind of match the top side of the tank. So I picked up this spray paint from Eastwood. It's supposed to be specifically for fuel tanks, but you could use it on whatever you want. And by the time it's done, it pretty much mimics the top half of the fuel tank, so it blends in nicely. And if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't even be able to tell that the fuel tank has been chip guarded underneath it. So I think the spray paint works really nice, and the fact that it's high in zinc just adds a little bit more protection to the fuel tank as far as corrosion. And you can see how it turned out. It just looks flawless. At this point, I just removed the tape and pretty much let the tank sit overnight to make sure that the paint and the chip guard is fully cured. So this is actually the next day right here. As you can see, I got a brand new part from Honda. It's the fuel sending unit. So it's basically what just measures how much fuel is in the gas tank. And this is the gasket that was supplied, I think, with the tank. And you can see how it's slightly small. And the one that came with the new sending unit is slightly larger. So that's one I'm going to use because it just seems to fit better. As far as this lock ring, I kind of found it difficult to install. It just didn't really want to go on, so I ended up bending these tabs right here and even messing with the tabs that are on the fuel tank itself. Normally you would want to grab like a brass punch for this because of fuel and sparks and obvious reasons. I really don't have to worry about that since there's never been any fuel in this tank, but it's just a good practice. You could also use some sort of lubricant to help this thing spin because it is quite difficult to get it moving. And once it gets going, you could just knock it all the way home. You could see where it's supposed to stop. Now this little lock ring is the one that was supplied with the tank, and to me it just seemed a little cheap. I wish I could have found an original one, but I checked on a website for Honda and I couldn't find one. So after I was done with it, I just went ahead and gave it some more of that spray paint for the fuel tank, just to cover up any exposed metal that it might have caused when I was bending the tabs. I'm going to be using a Delphi fuel pump assembly. It pretty much comes with everything you need assembled to just replace your old worn out pump. Mine is the fuel strainer. I did notice that there's no fuel strainer in my box. I don't know if it's just mine or what, but it was not in the package. But we're going to go ahead and replace this pump with a Walbro 255, as you can see here. And it looks like it's going to be a pretty simple swap. Oh, we got something in the back here. Looks like a piece of candy. Sweet. All right, let's take off this clamp right here. It comes off pretty easy with a flathead screwdriver, and we could just go ahead and chuck this in the garbage. And we are going to need this rubber insulator that's around the fuel pump, so we're going to go ahead, remove that, and set it aside. Looking at the connectors on the fuel pump, you can see they are different, so we cannot reuse the existing harness that came with this fuel pump assembly. The inlet ports is on the same side, so that's good. As you can see, the Walbro made into USA, so that's good, right? Here I have some clamps. It's just like the clamp we removed, so we're not going to use any of those worm drive style clamps, if that's what they're called. Anyway, so I don't have the exact tool for crimping these things, so I'm just going to use what I have laying around. Like I said earlier, we're going to reuse this sleeve that goes over the pump, and it fits perfectly over the Walbro. And then we could just go ahead and start to reassemble everything and put our clamp back on it. And perfect, just like they did it in China. And that's pretty much it, with the exception of the fuel strainer. There's nothing else to really do here, so let's move on. It's like the car is begging me, change my fuel pump, please. One thing I cannot stress enough is do not get underneath a car that isn't properly supported. The pinch walls on this car are pretty much rotted away, and you gotta be crazy to try to put a jack stand right there, because the car is just gonna fall. I just put the jack stands underneath the rear trailing arms, and that seemed to be perfectly fine. And now begins all the fun work with the rust. Yes, yes. I just said yes. Everything is rusty. It's horrible, but I got a special tool for that, so I'm about to pull it out right now, in fact. So excuse me while I whip this out. Someone please think of the children. And of course, a open flame near a fuel tank is a bad idea, right? It's very counterintuitive. But this thing does not use a flame to heat things up. It uses the powers of induction. So it basically heats up the molecules, gets them moving really fast to the point where it heats up whatever is inside of the coil and all that nonsense. So yeah, you just got schooled. Anyway, you can see how quickly it is heating up this nut right here, and it is a lifesaver. I would not attempt this job without a tool like this, because you definitely do not want an open flame near a fuel tank like I just mentioned. Another great tool for fighting rust is an impact gun like I'm using here. Once you heat up your nut or your bolt, use the impact gun to run the nut off, and what I'm doing here is going back and forth with it because it tends to clear up the threads on the actual bolt. You could get this done with hand tools, obviously, but impact gun it's the way to go when you're dealing with rust. Now that I got the straps loose, I tried lowering the gas tank, but there's a shield on the left side of the tank that I did not notice, so it was stopping me from lowering the gas tank. So that's what I'm doing right now. I should have done it first, but whatever. At this point, I have the floor jack supporting the gas tank. Oh, and did I mention that there is a little bit of rust? It's time to remove these fuel filler neck clamps, and this is pretty much how they came off in pieces. Okay, so now that I got these hoses taken care of, there was one more off to the right. I think it's for emissions or something like that, so here it goes. I went ahead and disconnected that. Now there's some essential tools when you're doing stuff like this: a good set of pliers and some hose pliers. You can see I have a small and a medium size here. Those things work great. And some hose picks, if that's what you want to call them. They're good for breaking bonds when they're stuck on from rust or just age. And of course, some silicone lubricants. I cannot stress it enough. It doesn't matter what brand it is, but for removing hoses or putting them back on, use silicone lubricant. I started to lower the fuel tank, as you could see, but then I forgot, or I remembered about the harness. So inside the car real quick, let's go ahead and disconnect the harness. And this is what happens when the gas tank is half filled and it just randomly tips on you when you're trying to remove it. Gasoline everywhere. That sucks. The main fuel line connecting to the fuel tank is right here on top, and there's a banjo bolt for it, which I'm gonna go ahead and remove. Now there's an easier place to disconnect it, which is just to the left of it. It's on the rail of the car, but the one on this car is just so rotted that it just looks like if I touch it, it's gonna snap. So it was way easier to just take off the banjo bolt. I picked up a new set of emergency brake cables when I first decided to do the rear disc brake conversion, so I've had them kicking around for quite some time. Unfortunately, they're not original, they are aftermarket. Like most parts in this car, it's hard to find original parts. But it is hands down absolutely the easiest to change the e-brake cables with the fuel tank off of the car, so it's kind of like I'm killing two birds with one stone here, and this heat shield is completely destroyed. And this is a perfect example of having the right tools for the job. You can see how both of these bolts are pretty much rounded off and they are stuck in there real good. So once again, I'm going to pull out my special extracting socket for removing rounded off fasteners. And with the heat and that special socket, it's like you can't beat it. It works perfectly every single time. I searched the darkest depths of the e-web looking for this shield, brand new OEM, and I cannot find it. And by the way, do not Google. You know what? I'm not even going to tell you because it was horrible. But I have no choice but to just go ahead and rip this one off. Of course, we are going to remove the old bolts that are holding it in place, and you can just see how it's just tearing everything up. But once again, the heat and the special extracting socket, perfect. I mentioned how it's impossible to find OEM parts for the CRX, but one thing you can find is nuts and bolts directly from the dealer, because they're just nuts and bolts and they still use them today. The bolts for the heat shield that we just ripped out, got them right here. The bolts for the emergency brake cables, got them right here. The bolts for the fuel tank straps, I know what you're about to say, got them right here, right? But no, I got them over there. After detaching the e-brake cables from inside the car, I could finally remove them and just chuck them in the trash. Now there is a good amount of surface rust on here, nothing crazy, but just looking at all of it, I knew I could not sleep that night if I just left it. So wire wheel on my drill and put my face mask on and some safety glasses and just go to town, right? Trying to knock off as much of the surface rust as I can, at least something that I feel comfortable with. You know, I'm not going crazy with any of this stuff, but I knew if I didn't do anything at all, I would not be happy with it. And to nobody's surprise, I'm going to be using a combination of both of these products, hashtag not a sponsor, to cover up any area where I ground off all of that surface rust and any other area in general. For the most part, I'm going to be using the CRC because it does a great job. It dries to the touch and it will not come off unless you try to remove it using some sort of solvent or something like that. So it's going to be there long term, and it's going to protect the metal. It's going to do a great job at that. The fluid film over time is going to wash off and you have to keep reapplying it, and I really don't plan on dropping the gas tank to keep applying fluid film, so it's why the CRC is going to do most of the work here. Now, even though I don't have a new heat shield to install, I'm still going to go ahead and install the bolts for it, because they're going to plug up the holes that are threaded and just prevent corrosion from creeping into them. And if I ever do get a heat shield for this, the bolts are here waiting. The fluid film is a great option for spraying anything that has threads in it, because it's going to keep the threads on the bolt nice and lubricated, and it's going to keep it corrosion free so the rust doesn't really creep into it. That's what you see me doing here. And here I have one of the emergency brake cables already installed, and I'm trying to do the other side. What can I say about this? It's an aftermarket part. It fits and it technically works. It just doesn't fit well, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of what I expect from an aftermarket part. You can never expect it to fit like an OEM part. And that's all I'm going to do for tonight. It's midnight. I smell like gasoline. I'm dirty. So let's go ahead and pick up on this tomorrow morning. And good morning, sunshine. The earth says hello. So I'm just gonna go ahead and remove whatever I need off of the old fuel tank, like various hoses, and these weird looking pads on top of the fuel tank because I need those also. Yes, it really has been a few days. As you can see, I transferred over whatever I could, such as the pads and various hoses. I got the new clamps in place, and other clamps I just completely chucked them in the trash because I had new ones. So I got everything else plugged off that I don't want any little critters getting into, because the tank was just sitting here in the garage. That hose right there specifically had a lot of rust on, even internally, so I let it sit in some rust dissolver for about 2 days, and it looked like a brand new hose by the time I was done with it. Also, don't forget to transfer over the little clips that hold the wire harness. Now, what really took a few days were these two pieces right here. This harness connector for the fuel pump and actual fuel strainer itself. I completely forgot to order them, so yeah, I was kicking myself in the head over that. As you can see, I have the harness installed, and I cut the wires and soldered and heat shrinked everything together. So black to black and red to red, right? We are all good to go. Now here's some helpful information that may save you some headaches and maybe even some money. If you're using your original CRX fuel pump assembly, then if you're going to put a walbro pump in it, order the 341. It's going to fit the OEM unit. But if you're using an aftermarket Delphi unit like I'm using here, the 341 is not going to fit. You have to order the 342. Trust me, okay? It'll save you a ton of headaches. Thankfully, the people at JHP USA were kind enough to exchange the fuel pump for me without any hassle, but learn from my mistakes. It might be a good idea to zip tie this harness right here, because if it's hanging down by the time you get the tank up against the car, you're not going to be able to fit the harness up, and you're going to have to bring the tank down once again. I picked up some new, of course, aftermarket tank straps, because here's the condition of the old ones. So there was no way in heck those old ones were going back on. I'm trying to do whatever I can to prevent scratching the tank as I put it in place, but that's pretty much impossible. You're gonna get scratches on the tank and scratches on the new tank straps, so just gonna have to deal with it. When I took off this banjo bolt right here, it was just as rusty as this pipe, but I let it sit in some rust dissolver for about 2 days, and as you can see, it looks like a brand new part. One thing I snoozed on is I did not get brand new crush washers. I know, I could hear you keyboard warriors already, but I put it together, and thankfully there was no leaks. I mean, you're gonna have to watch if you want to find out if there were any leaks. Yes, that's the YouTube way. because of all the scratches I got on the straps, I decided to just spray them down. Why not, right? Now I know what you're thinking. Why the hell is he using copper washers here? Didn't he order new ones from the dealer? Yes, I did. But I seem to have misplaced them. And the show must go on, right? So these are temporary. Once I find the ones I lost, I'll replace them. If I can't find them, I'll just buy another set. Before I tighten down the straps, I'm going to go ahead and reconnect all of these hoses and tighten any clamps that I need to. There was a valve that's mounted on the side of the old tank, and initially I was going to get rid of it, but then I decided to go ahead and take it off the old one to clean up any rust, make it look brand new again, and put it back on. So I did not show it in here, but I did end up putting that valve on the new tank. Now it's time to give this brand new fuel tank very first taste of fuel. Okay, so it is some time later, and despite all that cranking that we were doing and the fuel pump running, the car still would not start. Now, in a perfect world or a perfect YouTube video, everything would have went perfect, right? Everything went together as smooth as butter and the car turned on the very first time. But no, my videos aren't like that. If I'm gonna run into a problem, I'm gonna let you guys know what's going on, just so that you don't run into a problem like this. Okay, so we could hear the fuel pump running, yet I was getting absolutely no fuel out of that line right there that comes directly from the tank, not even a drip. So I decided to check for a clogged line, which I did not think it was going to be that, because the car ran perfectly before we dropped the tank. But I checked it anyways, and all the lines are clear, nothing's clogged. So the next step was the tank had to come out again. So at the moment, the tank is once again off of the car. Here goes the old fuel pump assembly. That's the new one with the walbro fuel pump in it. And I got it submerged right now in a liquid because we're basically bench testing it at this point. So I put power directly to it, how it should go. Like you see the red wire right here. That red wire gets power and the black wire gets ground, right? And the pump will turn on. There's a catch here though. Once you get it to turn on like that, you're supposed to get fuel spraying out of here. but we weren't. So before I go ahead and call a bad fuel pump, the next thing was to switch polarity. So basically put power to the ground side and put ground on the power wire and see what happens. And I'm going to show you exactly what happens. Okay, so right now I have my ground strap connected to the power wire, and this is ground, but I'm going to go ahead and put power to it and let's see what happens. There you go. You saw that? So at this point we confirmed that the pump does work. The only problem we have going on here is the wires are mixed up. And did I mix them up? No, not at all. We got the harness coming out the pump. We got black going to the ground and red going to power. So I did wire it up correctly, but for some reason, maybe whoever built that connector, the little harness that plugs into the pump, maybe someone was having a bad day and they mixed up the wire colors. I don't know, but this is actually a really good example. Okay, test your fuel pump, test everything before you put it back in your car, because you could save yourself a lot of trouble. Put a power to it, put a ground to it, and you should have fuel come out of here. So that's it. I'm pretty confident, and once we clean this up and put it back and put everything back together, the car is going to start after this. So here I am editing this video, and look what I see in one of my clips. Looking at the walbro pump right there on the right side, you could clearly see inside of the connector it says positive and negative. I did not catch that. Okay, I remember grabbing the pump and I was even looking for it at one point, and I was like, man, this thing doesn't say which side is positive, which side is negative, right? I thought it was weird, and I'd never noticed or thought that it would be inside until I'm going over the footage here, and here I see it. That is crazy. Had I caught that initially, I could have avoided all of this, because once I plugged in that connector, I would have been like, whoa, the pump says that this side is positive, but it's showing that it's landing on a black wire. At that point I would have just wired it up correctly. So it's just something I missed. I've connected the emergency brake cable, and I realized I'm missing the pin and a little clip that goes in there, so I had to once again order some parts from the dealer. So here I have the actual pin and the retainer clip, and it didn't take me long to realize that we have a problem here. You see the little hole that's drilled in the pin for the retainer clip? Well, it doesn't stick out far enough to accept the clip. And it's nothing wrong with the original parts because they are OEM. The problem here is the aftermarket emergency brake cable. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how you just have to deal with problems like this. So my solution was a drill bit. It seemed like the easiest route, and we're gonna go ahead and basically countersink it so that the pin could go in just a little bit further. Now that the pin is countersunk, you could actually see that it sits kind of flush on top, and it just gives us a little bit of extra clearance that we need. So now we could put the retainer clip in it. And there we go, it's working great now, just how it should. So it's nice to see that. I just have to clean up this little plastic cover that was on the side of the fuel tank and put it back on. I decided to show you guys the process anyway of putting on this piece right back on the fuel tank. So here it is as it came off the old one. You can see it's kind of rusty and crusty. So I decided to chuck it in the sandblaster, and this is how it came out. So it looks halfway decent, not too bad. Gave it some self-etching primer and let that cure, and then gave it a coat of spray paint and just hung it up to dry. Here's a piece all cleaned up. I think it looks halfway decent. I cleaned up everything as best as I could, and I'm just gonna go ahead and use new bolts to put it back on. One of the last things I want to do was replace the fuel filter, and it sits right here, so it looks like it's pretty easy to do. So let's go ahead and knock that out. And the one job that I thought was going to be the easy job turned out to be a real pain in the butt. As soon as I turned that key, I had fuel leaking everywhere. So I ended up putting on the old crush washers, the copper ones, on this line right here. This one still has the new crush washer, and I was trying different combinations and it was still leaking. Torqued it down to spec, didn't matter. I grabbed my wrench and tightened it as much as I possibly can by hand. Didn't matter, it was still leaking. So the final fix was to just grab my impact gun and run the bolts down. It wasn't a lot, I just gave them a few hits. I didn't want to go crazy with it to strip out any threads or anything like that, but I just gave it a few hits so that the bolt could turn a little bit more than what I could get it with the ratchet, and it seems to have done the trick. Right now it's holding pressure, and as you can see, it's completely dry. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cycle the key a few more times, and if everything looks good, I'm gonna start it up and keep an eye on it. And that's it for this video. I know it was a long one, so thank you for sticking around. But we actually had a lot of work done in this video. We put in a new fuel tank straps, fuel pump, emergency brake cables, which we attached to the rear brakes, fuel filter, cleaned up a lot of surface rust, and I think the most satisfying part to me was replacing all of those rusted nuts and fasteners with some nice clean new ones. So I'm really excited about that. Leave a comment below, I really appreciate it. What was your favorite part of the video? And make sure to hit that like button. If not, give it a dislike, you know, whatever your heart desires. But as far as the next video, I'm not really sure. I'm not going to set it in stone because I seem to always change my mind at the last second. But I think the next video is going to be on suspension work. So if you're interested in more CRX content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And like always, thanks for watching.